Folks, today we're talking about one of the most iconic images in tabletop gaming. A giant suit of chrome armor, a cannon that could shake the ground, and a character that almost every Rifts player wanted to play at least once, the Glitter Boy. Now, here's the interesting part. The Glitter Boy wasn't legendary because it was unstoppable, and it wasn't legendary because it had the biggest gun, and it wasn't legendary because it could beat every other character in the game. It became legendary because it perfectly captured what Rifts, unlike anything else, came before it, made it work. Let's talk about why. Folks, welcome to Railguns and Dragons, a series where I explore Rifts here on the channel. My name is Vince, the Evil Dungeon Master, so let's get on things. When Rifts first hit the shelves in 1990, it just wasn't another post-apocalyptic role-playing game. It was like everything rolled into one. It had fantasy, science fiction, horror, magic, aliens, demons, and a hell of a lot more. Your imagination was basically the limit. But standing right in the middle of all that madness was this shining suit of armor, the Glitter Boy. And the core rulebook even describes it as one of the most famous creations from before the coming of the Rifts. A towering suit of chrome power armor carrying an equally famous boom gun. That really wasn't an accident. Kevin Sambidia and the Palladium team understood something very important. Every great setting needs an icon, of some sort at least. Star Wars, they're iconic because of their lightsabers. Battletech had battle mechs, and Warhammer 40k had their space marines. Rifts had glitter boys. The moment that you saw that polished chrome armor standing 10 feet tall, carrying this mounted railgun that fired at Mach 2 with enough force to create an actual sonic boom, you knew this wasn't your D&D anymore. And that's exactly why so many players fell in love with it before they even rolled up a character. One of the biggest misconceptions about the Glitter Boy is that people remembered it because it was overpowered. I don't think that was true. People remember it because it was unforgettable, and that's a big difference. The first time you read about the boom gun, it sounds like, whatever, it's impossible. A railgun mounted on the shoulder, projectiles accelerated at Mach 2, a weapon so powerful it created an actual sonic boom blast every time it fired. That wasn't just another weapon entry in the role-playing game. That was something you could hear in your imagination. You've played games and stuff and you heard that boom, you could feel it. You could picture the pilot digging in the stabilizing spikes on the ground, bracing for the shot, pulling the trigger and hearing that blast that echoed through the landscape. You immediately understood this machine was something else. And then you kept reading. And suddenly, the Glitter Boy wasn't a superhero suit anymore. It was a military machine. It actually needed a trained pilot. It required all this maintenance. And it also carried limited ammunition. Its famous boom gun was so powerful, the armor itself needed an automatic stabilization system, or the recoil would literally throw the machine backwards. And that's pretty much a quote from the book. And that's something that Rifts did incredibly well, I think. It made technology feel believable. Now, not realistic, but believable. There was always a trade-off, and there was always a consequence. Even Glitter Boys had their limitations, and I think that's one of the reasons players respected it, instead of simply seeing it as the I win button. Another thing that made the Glitter Boys special was that it felt like discovering a lost legend. The game describes it as one of the greatest creations from the time before the Rifts, a machine that survived the apocalypse and became famous centuries later. That is a quote from the book. That's a fantastic piece of world building right there. You're not climbing into a brand new military prototype, you're piloting history when you jump into one of them. Every Glitter Boy suit has a backstory, honestly, some type of story at least. Where did it come from? Who maintained it all these years, and who actually owned this thing before you got into it? Could another kingdom be searching for it? Even the Coalition simply couldn't build unlimited Glitter Boys. Free Quebec maintained one of the few known manufacturing facilities, while rumors spread about pre-Rift stockpile that were hidden and secret factories somewhere in the western wilderness. That made every glitter boy feel, I don't know, valuable and not disposable. So what really made them stand out? Well, it really wasn't the armor and it wasn't the boom gun. It was what the glitter boy represented. Think back to games most of us were playing in the 80s and the early 90s. You had fantasy heroes, a fighter with a sword, a wizard casting fireballs, a thief sneaking around through the shadows. Then rifts came into play. And, it said you could play a pilot wearing 10 feet of chrome power armor carrying a weapon that sounds like an artillery gun. That wasn't evolution, that was a complete shift in your imagination. It told players anything's possible. And rifts kept reinforcing that idea. One player could be a glitter boy, and another could be a dragon hatchling, and another could be a juicer, and a fourth could be a cyber knight. Somehow, all of them belonged in the same party. No other role-playing game was making promises like that in the 90s. The glitter boy became the symbol it actually became a symbol of promise, not because everyone played one, because everyone wanted to be one. Even if you've never created a glitter boy character, you still remember that iconic suit. You remember the artwork, you remember reading about the boom gun, you remember wondering how anything could survive being hit by it. That's the difference between a popular character and an iconic one. Icons will stay with you, even decades later. If you ask someone who hasn't opened up a Rifts book since high school to name something, anything from the game, there's a good chance they're probably going to say the glitter boy. Not the rules, not their setting, though they may quote that the rules drove them up the wall and the settings were amazing, but they will remember the glitter boy if they've played Rifts at all. And here's something I do appreciate even more today than I did back then. The glitter boy wasn't treated like the answer to every problem. It was incredibly powerful, but the world around it was just as dangerous. You had dragons walking around, demons walking around, alien intelligence invaded continents. Power armor wasn't really unusual. It was kind of expected in Rifts. That kept the glitter boy from becoming boring. Because no matter how impressive that chrome armor looked, Rifts always had something bigger waiting over the next hill for it. That's something modern games struggle with, I think. They introduce powerful characters, then the world has to revolve around that character. Rifts did the opposite. The world was so insane that even the legendary glitter boy had to fight to survive one day. And I think that's one of Kevin Sabedia's smartest design decisions. He made players feel powerful, then he built a world that didn't really care. I also think there's another reason the glitter boy has lasted for more than 3 decades. It captured a very specific moment in gaming history. Back then, role-playing games were exploding with new ideas. You had Shadowrun mixing fantasy with cyberpunk, Battletech was introducing players to giant walking war machines, anime was becoming easier to find in North America. Science fiction was colliding with fantasy in ways you'd never really seen before. And then Rifts came onto the scene and basically said, why choose? You don't have to pick between knights and robots. You don't have to choose between dragons and power armor. You don't have to decide if your campaign is fantasy or science fiction. Here's it all. There's the buffet. The glitter boy became the perfect symbol of philosophy. It looked futuristic. It also felt military. But you could be standing next to a wizard casting spells and a dragon bringing fire, or a ley line walker opening a rift to another dimension. Somehow it all just kind of worked. Or at least it worked in the wonderfully chaotic way that only Rifts could, right? I don't know. And that's something I think newer players sometimes miss. Rifts was never trying to be perfectly balanced. It was trying to make you say, that's awesome. And it kind of did. And I believe there was an interview with Kevin and they kind of asked him about balance in the game. And he was like, balance is not my problem. Making cool stuff is my problem. Something along those lines. So the glitter boy accomplished that better than most anyone else in the game, making things awesome. Even people who never played one, they kind of wanted one. Even game masters loved putting them into the campaign one way or another. Because when a Glitter Boy showed up, everyone at the table was paying attention. Because the atmosphere changed, you knew something big was about to happen. Not because the rules said so, but because the imagination and the image of the Glitter Boy carried that weight. That's incredibly difficult for a role-playing game to achieve on its own. Most character classes are just words on a page. The Glitter Boy became an icon. It became marketing, it became artwork, it became convention banners, it became one of the first things people associated with Rifts. Heck, look at the front cover of Chaos Earth. It's the Glitter Boy holding an American flag. How much more patriotic and cool could you get than that? And more than 30 years later, Palladium still uses it to represent the game. That tells you everything you need to know. There are hundreds of OCCs spread across dozens and dozens and dozens of books. Some are stronger, some are stranger, some are far worse versatile. But if someone asks you to picture Rifts, chances are you're probably going to picture that Glitter Boy in your head. And maybe that's why the Glitter Boy is still legendary today. Not because it has the biggest gun or the thickest armor or the most powerful OCC you've ever written. It became legendary because it made people, I think and dream. It made players stop in the middle of flipping through the rulebook and think, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before. That's something every game designer hopes to accomplish when they make a game. Very few ever do that. More than, 30 years later, the Glitter Boy still appears on the convention banners and fan art and miniature collections and discussions about the greatest role-playing games ever made. And it's not because people remember every statistic and not because everyone agrees it was the best choice. It's because they remember how it made them feel when they first saw it. For a lot of us, the Glitter Boy wasn't just another character, it was our introduction to Rifts. It was that moment we realized this wasn't another fantasy game, this was a world where anything could happen. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Glitter Boy. It wasn't just a suit of armor, it was your invitation to use your imagination in ways no other role-playing game ever asked before. And after all these years, it still remains iconic and legendary. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd like to hear about it. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, like the video. That's very important for the algorithm. I'd like to hear your stories about Rifts and using Glitter Boys. Have you played one? And tell me a good story about it. I love to see those things in the comments. So with that said, I'm going to head out. Keep it original, keep it old school. Good night, and God bless everybody. You've been listening to Railguns and Dragons Reborn, a podcast about Rifts. Head over to railgunsanddragons.com for more information.